Okay, my awesome American novel students. Earlier, I started talking to you guys about literary criticism and how literary criticism is looking at a text and no longer just reading it for plot and for random literary terms. You guys are all past that. You're able to understand a plot, maybe with a little bit of direction. We'll definitely be discussing literature a lot, and I'll make sure you understand those basics. But now we're adding in a new element, a little bit of a higher caliber element, where you're going to also be looking at a story through a specific lens. And this first lens is the feminist lens. And we also talked about how feminist or feminism has been kind of tainted by the media, but I'm not talking about the tainted word. Feminist just simply means looking at how women are treated. Politically, it means giving equal rights to women, but when it comes to literature and academically, feminism just means, or a feminist literary critic lens simply means, how are women treated in books? That's it. We're not going to get political at all with this because that would really detract and distract from the awesome books that we're reading, and that were written far, far, far before our political system. So we're not going to get into politics. We're just looking at how are female characters treated. Second semester, we're going to look at how are poor people treated, how are rich people treated, and then third and fourth quarter, we're going to look at how is mental illness treated and how are these characters treated. So you can see how different ones will be more or less interesting to you, but hopefully what you'll find in this class is that you find all, like, looking at literature through a specific lens really adds a more interesting element to what you're reading and makes you think a little bit deeper about what we're reading. So without further ado, I want to dive more into what the feminist lens is. Make sure you are taking notes and make sure that you are pausing as frequently as you need to get this information down, because quizzers are always able to happen. And I'm going to tell you right now, this one's probably going to have a quizzer over it. So make sure you take notes. That way the stuff sticks in your brain a little bit more. Feminist lens, what does that mean? We went through this, but it means the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of equality of the sexes. Essentially, it's about how women and gender are viewed and written. Again, no politics. Feminist criticism is the concern with the ways in which literature and other cultural productions reinforce or undermine the economic, political, social, and psychological oppression of women. We're just looking at how women are treated, which you're going to see in our first quarter books. It's hard to ignore the women. You'll see next quarter that there's not a lot of women in literature far back in the day like we're going. So these are kind of rare and special in their own right. Next, going a little bit deeper, what does feminist criticism mean? There's a number of different approaches. And when you're reading, I want you to kind of think about all of these or whichever of these makes sense to you. So again, be taking notes. I'm going to explain a little bit, but I'm really going to focus in on the ones that are important to us. Women are oppressed by the patriarchy economically, politically, socially, and or psychologically. This is basically saying that women are oppressed by the patriarchy or men, and how men are treated better than women. What you can do when you're reading is, while you're reading the book, decide, is this woman being treated the same way that her male counterpart is? You're probably going to find that an easy question to answer, and then you're going to analyze, well, why are they different and why are they the same? Next, in every domain where patriarchy reigns, women is other. She is marginalized and defined only by her difference from male norms. Again, this is just about women are treated as an other or kind of pushed to the outside of men. Men come first, women are kind of on the outside of that. We're going to speed through this next one because it's not going to come up too much unless you really want to dig deep and find this one yourself. All of Western civilization is deeply rooted in patriarchal ideology. For example, Eve as the origin of sin and death in the world. We won't see that reference very much, but we will see a patriarchal society when we start Daisy Miller. While biology determines our sex, male or female, culture determines our gender. This is really interesting. This one you see more and more in modern day works, and this definitely connects to the news and our culture. There's so many interesting things we can talk about it. We really won't see this one a ton, though some of our female characters will step up and fend for their families or make more money than their husbands or have to take care of themselves. So kind of that reversal of gender roles we'll see, but we're not going to see it too big. So keep your eye out on those for in our first two books, because if you're really paying attention, you'll be able to find some gender norms being flipped. Next, all feminist activity, including feminist theory and literary criticism, has as its ultimate goal to change the world by prompting gender equality. This would be a big question at the end of the text. Do you think this book prompts gender equality? That will be very, very interesting to talk about, especially at the end of Scarlet Letter. Some of you will side with the female lead role, the woman wearing the scarlet letter, and some of you are not going to side with her. It'd be a really fascinating discussion to see, is that author prompting equality, or is he completely siding with men? And should they be equal to the author? Next, gender issues play a part in every aspect of human production and experience, including the production and experience of literature, whether we are consciously aware of these issues or not. You don't really need to think too hard about that one because we're not going to talk about it very much. Basically, feminist critics look at the role of gender in literature and art. We are going to read two pieces that have often been critiqued by feminist literary critics. And remember, critique is not necessarily bad. They're looking at the pros and the cons of that work, and then they're building their own opinions, which is exactly what you guys are going to do. You're going to see the pros and the cons of how both genders are treated, and then analyze and make your own opinions. Ultimately, our goal is to have your literary analysis start looking like the professional criticism we read. We are constantly going to be working on analyzing literature, and ultimately, as you've done before, but we're taking it up a couple notches, you're going to write a literary analysis, and it's going to start looking a little more professional because you're using these lenses. Typical questions people will ask. So as you're reading Daisy Miller now, Scarlet Letter, in a little bit, think about these questions. How is the relationship between men and women portrayed? Pretty simple. How is it portrayed? 2, what are the power relationships between men and women? Who is in power in the relationships? And also, ultimately, who wins and who loses? How are male and female roles defined? Are women allowed to do certain things and men are allowed to do others, and they're not able to cross very often? What constitutes masculinity and femininity? So that's not the biological gender, but it's how a person views themselves or how people view that person. What constitutes masculinity, femininity? How do characters embody these traits of masculinity and femininity? What does the work say about women's creativity? What does the history of the work's reception by the public and by critics tell us about the operation of patriarchy? That is a very interesting question. That might be a question you explore more next year, depending on which class you take, and you'll explore in college, depending on what English classes you take in college. We really won't be looking at the public's reception of these first two books, but it's an interesting question all the same. And what role does the work play in terms of women's literary history and literary tradition? Again, a very interesting question. It's a question that feminist literary critics ask often, but we are probably not going to get into. We're going to have a lot to talk about with the questions I've lined up here and the questions you guys are going to be asking when we're reading these books. So, as a reminder, make sure you've paused, make sure you're taking notes. We almost definitely will have a quizzer over this, which will be 1 to 2 questions about overall ideas from this lesson, and we will be talking a lot more about this as we keep reading, but I want you to have it now so it's sitting in the back of your mind every time I give you homework. Every time you're reading, this is what you're annotating, this is what you're looking for. And as always, I am there before school, I stay after school. So if something is just not making sense to you, you don't understand the idea of a lens or literary criticism, please, please, please feel free to come and talk to me. We'll talk more about how I set up basically office hours or writing conferences, but you and I can conference at any time. I put on my calendar your time slot, so we set up a 10-minute time period for us to talk, and you get uninterrupted time to just ask me whatever questions you have, and I will help you clear up any questions. So if you want to talk to me before school, make sure you do so before we have a quizzer. And if you think you've got it, but you want to talk a little bit more after school in the coming days this week, also just let me know in class and we will definitely do that. I'm not going to leave any of you hanging, especially as we are finally getting this year started and we're starting to learn stuff. So have a wonderful night, everyone, and I will see you all tomorrow. Bye.